The topic of today's class is going to be a continuation of the wisdom of King Solomon, which we began last week. Shlomo HaMelech, the third king of the Jewish people, the son of King David, was also known as the wisest of all men. And he wrote 3 books. One of them is the book of Proverbs. He wrote another one called Ecclesiastes, and the third one is the Song of Songs. And last week we discussed the origin behind those books and the names that he had. Today we're going to focus on some of his statements that deal with wealth, with riches. What did he have to say about that? How did he feel? Just on a personal note, I grew up in New York. My father's been a rabbi there for 35 years. He took the position when I was 1 year old, so I'm 36. And what's that?
I said we figured that one
Yes,
out.
excellent. That was a pretty easy one, I guess.
Yeah.
And he's a rabbi of a pretty affluent community. Everyone there is pretty wealthy. Just to give you a picture of that, I worked there as a rabbinical intern for 2 years prior coming to Michigan. And the rent that we were paying on our home that we were renting, the rent was $5,000 a month. That was the cheapest place we could find. There were other places that were $5,500, $6,000. It was the cheapest one we could find.
How big was it?
It was 3 floors, not much larger than the home that I live in now, which is considerably less expensive. I live in Southfield now. This place in New York is called New Rochelle. Yes, it's New Rochelle. It's in the suburbs of New York City. So people that want to, the Dick Van Dyke Show, by the way, was filmed in New Rochelle. I used to watch that because there's a TV station called Nickelodeon, and they would show all of the old TV shows. So when I was a kid, I would watch, the Dick Van Dyke Show, Father Knows Best, Mr. Ed, the Talking Horse. I like that stuff. So New Rochelle is the name of the city, and people that live in New York want to work in Manhattan but have a large home and have some space, live in the suburbs, and this is in the county of Westchester. And it's a wealthy place. In order to make it there, when you factor in the cost of living plus private school Jewish tuitions, you're making a good little fortune in order to get by. So I grew up as the rabbi's son in a wealthy community, which, by the way, for my bar mitzvah and wedding was a wonderful thing. But could everyone hear me, by the way? Am I speaking loud enough? Excellent.
You're good.
Great. So I would sit there, my dad being the rabbi, he would sit up in front on the bima, and I would sit next to my dad, because even though I wasn't the rabbi, I was a little kid, but a little boy wants to sit next to his daddy. And I would have that vantage point that my father had of all the congregants in the room. By the way, since then, whenever I go into a synagogue, I always try to find a seat as far to the back as possible. I think it's a little post-traumatic stress disorder, sitting up in front of everyone look at you. Now I always try to sit as far in the back. I don't want anyone knowing who I am or what I do. So I was looking at the people one Saturday morning, and these are people, many of whom are millionaires. And I said, is this a happier group of people than, let's say, people who lived in Jerusalem, where I also spent some time, and are of much lesser means? Is this a happier group of people? They have much more, but are they happier? And I looked around the room, and you could probably guess what the answer is going to be. No, they were not a happier group of people than the people who had less, living simpler, more humble and modest lifestyles. So that was a perspective that I grew up with. And my prayer for there are these little boys and little girls who, when you ask them when they're about 6 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? And some people say, rich. That's their answer, However, whatever will make them rich, that's what they want to do. And I never had that. I never wanted to be rich. I think God's, he listened to my prayer, it came true. I'm not rich. But my prayer was that I should have all the things that I need, and maybe a little extras here and there. But I never had this dream of being rich, because I was given this very close-up view of the fact that being rich will not make you a happier person, will not give you necessarily a more fulfilled or meaningful life. And I would like now to discover together with you, explore some of the really wise statements that King Solomon had when it comes to wealth. So let's turn to our source sheets on page 1. Source 1. We'll start from the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. And I want to begin with a source which will give importance to wealth, a lot of which King Solomon is going to say will minimize the stress, the emphasis. He's going to contrast wealth to some other gifts that are available out there, and he's going to minimize wealth on that totem pole of importance. But it's important to note that wealth, having sustenance, is of incredible importance. And let's take a look at source 1, where he says in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 15, "A rich man's wealth is his strong city. The ruin of the impoverished is their poverty," which means the idea of a fortified city, of a city which is protected by a wall. It used to be in ancient times, every city that was able to call itself a city had a wall around it. The ancient city of Jerusalem actually still has that wall, which you can go to, the walled city of Jerusalem, and that was simply because invaders would always try to conquer your city, and the only reason why they wouldn't have yet conquered your city was because they couldn't. And what would keep them away, would ward off the attackers, would be the city wall. So when you speak of a strong city, it's fortified with a wall, and that's King Solomon's message here, that a rich man's wealth is like the city wall. It protects. It helps you stay on your feet. Life sometimes has some difficult things that come people's way. A person's car could one day decide it's not driving anymore. And I don't blame it. In this weather, by the way, if I would be a car, I would say, no way, man. It's 6 o'clock in the morning, and I am not ready for this, you know? But I want to just give everyone a big thank you for coming out in this weather. It is cold. It is frigid. Don't hate me for this, but I actually like this weather. Most people don't, and I get that. My wife does not want me saying, oh, it's great. But I actually went running yesterday, and I went to the track. And for some reason, nobody had been on that track since it snowed. I couldn't figure out why it was that even the door to, I had to like push that door because there was still snow up against it. And then there was about 6 inches of snow on the track. It was pristine. There was not a footprint in it. And I started to go around that track. And it was just this serene moment of the day where it was just me and myself. No one was there with me, surprisingly. And this weather,
it's good to be young.
I guess so.
That is.
I guess so. So yeah, it's a little slippery in 6 inches, but if you do go down, you'll have a nice padding, you'll have a nice soft landing. And by the way, when you run on snow, especially soft snow, it's like running on sand. When you run on sand, it requires a lot more effort. So we were just talking about a person's car driving in this weather. A person's car could go on them, and they need to buy a new car. There are all kinds of unexpected expenses that a person can incur in their day-to-day life. And it's really having the support of sustenance, of having some kind of savings put away that could help us stand on our feet when times can, and sometimes they do. It's almost a guarantee that we'll have expenses in our life. And that's the protective wall that we have that helps us stay on our feet, is having some kind of savings put away, which is important. And that's why I want to start with this source, because after all that we're going to say that might minimize the importance of wealth, it's important to realize that it's important, it's very important. Let's take a look now at source 2. And this source speaks of the transient nature of wealth and poverty. And it says, rich and poor meet. God is the maker of them all. And the way I kind of conjecture up this imagery is of a ladder. And on the bottom of the ladder, you have the very bottom of financial success, people that have never gotten there yet, people who are poor, impoverished, indigent. And on the top of the ladder, you have the rich and the wealthy, people that have made it big. I'm going to digress for a second. When you say to an American, that person is very successful, what do most people think of? That person is successful. What's the number one thing that comes to mind? It's money. Success means the guy's done well in business. He has a practice which is very well frequented, and that's a notion that I feel is a Western notion, but it's not an accurate one. And we'll explore this further in depth in a little bit. But you're going to tell me the person is successful because he has a lot of money? What does his marriage look like? What do his children look like? Do his children have a relationship with him? What kind of person is he? What has he accomplished in terms of his studies? You'll have this. King Solomon actually said this, that not to the wise men is bred, which means that very often you'll have people who are very wise, they're very, learned, and for some reason their ideas don't pan out, they can't make it in the business world. And occasionally you'll have people that are not the smartest of people, and they will really, they'll have this one idea, and they'll just become, you ever see the movie Forrest Gump? Tom Hanks, right? So the way the movie portrays him, he is not the brightest of people, yet he becomes fabulously wealthy, right? That's an ideal also, that not always, very often people that are wealthy are often not stupid, but there's no guarantee to that. You could have someone who's not bright, and they make it big. And to call success and define it by how much cash they have in their bank or what kind of real estate investments they have, to me is losing sight of the full picture. So back to this ladder. On the top, we have the rich. On the bottom, we have the poor. And it says rich and poor meet, which means the connotation there is that when you're stuck at the bottom of the ladder, it's not permanent. There's no guarantee you'll be there forever. And when you're at the top of that ladder, it's also not a permanent situation. At some point, one may begin to rise and one may begin to fall. And eventually they'll meet in the middle of that ladder. One's fortune's on the downturn, one's on the upswing. There's no permanence to wealth or riches or poverty. People's fortunes change all the time. In both areas, on both spectrums of that ladder, people's fortunes change. Now let's just take a look at the next phrase of this verse. God is the maker of them all. It's still on page 1. What does that mean? It speaks of the rich and the poor meeting people on different ends of the ladder. What does that mean, God is the maker of them all? We understand, of course, God created us all. What is King Solomon trying to tell us here? And the following idea is explained by a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, one of the great German rabbis of the 1800s. I went to a school that was called the Yeshiva of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. It's in Washington Heights in New York. As a matter of fact, one of my children just came home. My 7-year-old daughter came home with questions on the Torah portion. And I see in the bottom left corner, it says Yeshiva Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. One of the teachers that worked in that school that I went to created this worksheet and distributed it to schools around the country that they could also gain from the work that she put in. So it was one of these nostalgic moments to see that writing on the bottom of the paper. I grew up with that. So this Rabbi Hirsch notes the following. When you speak about God being the creator, the maker, that connotes man being created for a purpose. We're here on this world for a purpose. We're here for a reason. And one of those reasons is to rise above the different challenges that may come our way. And life is full of challenges. It's full of hurdles that we're meant to jump, temptations that we're meant not to get involved in, moments where perhaps we are tested with our anger. Things happen that get us potentially very angry and we're meant to calm down. That's the purpose of life. The purpose of life is to go through life and all that it has to challenge us with, to make the right decisions, the right choices. Yes?
I've never studied Proverbs, so maybe I'm coming at this from the wrong perspective. But these are very earthly ways you're describing these. When I read rich and poor meet, God is the maker of them all, I thought of Olam Haba.
That's a great point.
I didn't think of they meet on earth, they meet where we all meet.
Right, at 100%. That's a beautiful way to interpret the verse. You'll have in Proverbs, because it was written by someone who was very wise, there will be multiple ways of explaining it. And this is the way Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch understands it. But I am certain that if you were to look through, and there are probably at least 20 commentaries written on Proverbs, if you were to look through all 20, you'll probably find what you just said, because that has a ring of truth to it. The idea that in this world we have rich, we have poor, we have the different classes. Once we all die, we come to a common ground, and no longer are we categorized by how much money we had, because God's the maker of them all, and that could have the idea that He's the maker of us all. We'll eventually be reunited with Him in another existence, and then how much money we had is completely irrelevant. So I like that idea very much. That's beautiful, and I'm sure someone says it. It's just a question of finding which early commentator understood the verse that way. But the way Rav Hirsch understands it is that there are challenges that are given to a person by virtue of being rich. You'll say, well, what's so challenging about that, But it does come with its challenges. Will you use your wealth correctly? God gave you, He gave you assets, and He expects you to use them responsibly. What will you do with them? Will you give charity? Will you perhaps donate to research that will better people's lives? Or will you use it selfishly? Will you just use it to squander on vacation after vacation? What will you do with it? And that's a challenge, that's the test. Not an easy test to pass, not an easy one at all. And being poor is also a challenge. Will you be resentful of God? Will you perhaps be more inclined to be dishonest? When a person is struggling financially and then they have to fill out their tax returns, or, I just had this with health insurance. Health insurance will ask, well, how much money are you making? And, you got to be honest about that. That's, you are perhaps more tempted to be dishonest when you're in a situation of financial hardship than you are when you are in a position of wealth. And therefore, both of these situations present us with challenges and tests. God being the maker of them all means that a person is meant to pass the challenges, both as a rich man and as a poor man. And there are people who experience both of those in their lifetimes. There are people that stay poor their whole lives or stay rich their whole lives. But we're meant to pass the challenges of both of those stations of life. And that is actually beautifully written by one of the primary books of Jewish philosophy and thought. In Hebrew, it's known as the Mesilat Yesharim. In English, that's translated as the Path of the Just. It was written by Rabbi Moshe Chaim in the 1700s of Italy. And he puts this beautifully. He says that in source 3, all matters in this world, whether we perceive them as good or we see them as bad, are tests for a person. Poverty on one side and wealth on the other. As King Solomon stated, lest I become sated, I'll have a lot. And I'll deny and I'll say, who is God? And that's another test, another challenge of wealth, which is people who have things going very well for them will kind of say to God, God, I'm doing okay. I don't need you in my life, They don't realize that the one responsible for giving them all of their bounty is God. But they're not going to turn to Him. They'll deny His existence in their life and say, there's no place for you in my life. When people sometimes have difficulty, that's a time when they'll be more inclined to turn to God and say, God, help me, I'm going through something really rough. So that's a challenge of wealth. Lest I become sated, I'll deny God. I won't seek Him or look for Him. But lest I become poor and turn to theft. Tranquility on one side is a challenge, and hardship on the other. And one finds himself confronted by battles coming from ahead and from behind. If he will be a true warrior, he will be victorious on all fronts. He will become the complete man who will merit to cleave to his Creator. He will exit the entrance hall, that's a metaphor for this world, and enter into the palace, that's the world to come, to be illuminated with the light of eternal life. So when you see hardship, poverty as a challenge, as a test, what will I do with that? What will I do with wealth? That's also a test. That's another way to perceive them. Neither of those situations, says King Solomon, is permanent. One could rise, one can fall. Our fortunes can change. My wife actually grew up in a household like that. She told me that growing up, her parents financially had their ups and they had their downs. There was a point in her life where her father was the CEO of a very large company and was very successful. There were times where they were trying to figure out how to save money on grocery bills. And she grew up through all of that, and she experienced both parts of life. Many people experience both of those parts. And both of them are challenges, areas that we can grow. In source 4, King Solomon acknowledges that in an extreme wealth or an extreme poverty situation, challenges are difficult, and he says to God, please give me neither of those two. I don't want to be very rich. I don't want to be very poor. I just want to have my daily bread. I want to have the things that I need. And he says in source 4, in Proverbs chapter 32, two requests I have of you, deny them not before I die. Vanity and falsehood remove from me. And I believe the way to understand this verse is that vanity, he's about to explain that he's referring to wealth and poverty. Vanity may be a reference to wealth. Very often people that are wealthier perhaps are a bit more vain, are more inclined towards vanity. And falsehood might mean the challenge of poverty. It might challenge my level of honesty. Give me neither poverty nor riches. For nourishment let me find the bread allotted to me, lest I become full and deny and say, who is God? Or lest I become poor and a thief, and yet hold on to the name of my God. That last phrase, by the way, let's just analyze that for a second. That's a bit unclear. I might become a thief, and yet I'm going to hold on to the name of God. What does that mean? I'll be a thief, and I'm going to hold on to the name of God. Well, what's the problem of holding on to the name of God if you're a thief? And I saw one of the explanations say, if you are a dishonest person, you're a cheat. You know, let's say your name is Bernie Madoff, right? That's a good example. Nobody stole more money than Bernie Madoff, right? So that's your name. Let's say you would on the outside be to the masses you would appear as a God-fearing person. To the world you seem devout, and yet now it's just discovered the scandal that you are a scoundrel. You are a mega thief. That would be a desecration of God's name. If the whole world says, wow, look at this, Jewish person, and they seem to be devout and observant, and they steal everyone's money. Better off they wouldn't be so observant or so devout on the outside. And that's what that means here. Lest I become a thief and I'm going to still hold on to the name of my God. People may see me as somebody who's an upstanding individual. I'll be professing my belief in God and talking about Him, yet I'm caught stealing. That will be something extra negative because it desecrates God's name. People will say, well, look what people who believe in God do. And we don't want that. We try to stay off the front pages of the newspapers. Never looks good for the Jewish people. All right, let's move on now to the next source. And here King Solomon says, of course, our careers, our livelihoods, wealth is important. We need to put in the effort necessary. Right? Jews we believe in miracles, 100%. I believe in all those stories in the Bible where it speaks of the sea splitting and the plagues in Egypt. I believe it happened and the manna falling from heaven as the Jews traversed the desert for 40 years. I believe in miracles, not just on 34th Street. Real miracles I'm talking about here. But yet we don't rely on miracles. We don't say, let God provide for me. I'll just sit back and perhaps manna will fall in my living room. We don't do that. We get educated. Jews always believe in education. We take jobs, careers, and we try our best to earn a living. But yet here King Solomon says, make sure that you have your priorities straight. The idea of a workaholic, somebody who spends from 6 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night in the office, comes home when all of his children are asleep, and his wife, bless you, and his wife is halfway asleep. That's not the best of things. So let's take a look at source 5. Do not wear yourself out in pursuit of wealth, lest you desist from your own understanding. And I want to elaborate on this with an idea from Rabbi Noach Weinberg, who was the founder of Aish HaTorah in Jerusalem, one of the famous yeshivas, study places where people can go who don't have a strong Jewish background, can go and study. It actually overlooks the western wall, Aish HaTorah. People go up to the roof sometimes, and they have this incredible view. As a matter of fact, I believe that Aish HaTorah has a webcam. That's a camera that's hooked up to the internet, and it's just this live feed of the Kotel Plaza. So you could go online and you can see what's going on right now at the Kotel. It is going to be dark there at this hour of the evening because they're 7 hours ahead. Oh, one thing, we get a mazel tov. My wife's sister just had a baby boy in Jerusalem. So I got that text at 12:02, and that's exciting news for the family. So this rabbi of Aish HaTorah, Rabbi Noach Weinberg, he explains this very well. And the way he does this, he explains different areas that we value, that are important to us. And area number one, level number one, is our assets, our belongings, the material objects that we hold on to. And those are really important. Of course, our home is one of those things, right? The house in which we live, how important is that to us? Ranks high up there, right? Our car. In Michigan, you can't get around without a car, even when the weather is decent. Everything is far apart. The mass transit system is not well developed. The reason I heard why they did that was for the car industry. If they had a good subway system like in New York City, well, people won't buy cars, right? I have friends in Manhattan who don't own a car, and it's not because they can't afford one. It's because it's more convenient getting around New York City by the subway than it is finding a place to park your car and drive your car and the gridlock. But in Michigan, you need a car. Our cars are important to us. Our clothes. All of these things are all part of our material possessions, and that's level one, and that's very important. But says Rabbi Weinberg, there's another level. There's level two. And he says level two is of such critical importance and value to us that there is no amount, there is no dollar amount. You could take what all level one has to offer, and you can offer it to you for something from level two, but you're not willing to relinquish, you're not willing to sell anything from level two for any amount of the stuff in level one. What is level two? Your loved ones, your children, your spouse. How much money would you be willing to take to sell your child? Is there an amount? No, there's no amount. No matter, there is no money in the world, no currency that can be offered to you that will make you change your mind and say, okay, I'll give up this child. Am I correct? Are we good? Yes? So, that's level two. Really important. Nothing on level one can buy it. Believe it or not, there's a level three. There's something even more important to us than our loved ones, than our children. And you'll say, well, what can that be, right? Sorry, my phone is dinging. That's probably the Mazel Tov texts coming in. Everyone's saying Mazel Tov and congratulating each other. Level three, our morals and our values. And I'm going to use an extreme example. Forgive me for doing so. I realize it's not pleasant, but it will bring home the message very clear. Imagine someone says to you, there is a ship of 1947, a ship of immigrants making their way to the Holy Land. And the British are not very happy about this immigration. The Arabs are certainly not happy about it. And somebody places a pistol to your head, and they say, this button right here controls a torpedo that is aimed directly at that ship full of men, women, and children. If you don't torpedo that ship, I'm going to kill you. Or they say, if you don't torpedo that ship, I'm going to kill some of your loved ones. What do you do? And I realize this is a very horrific situation, a scenario, but it will bring home the message. Are you going to become a murderer? You're going to kill a boat full of men, women, and children because your child's life is at risk, is in danger? If the Nazis capture your family and say, if you don't tell us where the other Jews are hiding, we're going to kill you and your family, do you give up the lives of other people? You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to murder someone to save your life or save anyone else's life. You can't become a murderer. That's one of the things that's more valuable than life, than your own life, or the life of anyone that you love. That's level three. That's our ideals, our values. And it's more important than level two. It should be. And it's not an easy thing to do. I don't know what I would do. I'm not saying, of course, but I could just tell you what I believe to be the correct moral response there is, please don't kill me, please don't harm my family. I can't be a murderer. You want to be a murderer, that's your decision. And the reason why I tell you this, these different levels of value, of importance that Rabbi Weinberg lays forth, is because he points out, level two, we said, is far more important than level one, right? There's nothing in level one that could buy anything from level two. It's not valid currency when you're talking about level two. But yet you'll have people. You'll have the workaholics out there that don't see their children when the children grow up because they're always in the office. They never have time for their family. Why? Because they're busy making money. Now, I realize there are jobs out there that the job will say either you work these hours or don't work at all, and then you don't have a choice. Then that's the only job available to you. You have to take it. You don't have a choice. But I'm talking about the jobs where you could come home at 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon and have dinner with the family and spend time with the kids and put them to sleep at night and tell them bedtime stories as they drift off to sleep as you're holding them, which is one of the most valuable things I can do as a parent. I love that, at night being home with the kids, which is one of the things I love about my job, which is that I work in the mornings and I work in the afternoon and I work again at night. But I have off from about 4:30 till 7:30 at night. I have those 3 hours off, and I will almost never schedule anything during those 3 hours because I come home and I have supper with the family at 5 o'clock, and then we do homework together, and and then I put the kids to sleep and do baths and showers and put them to sleep and tell them stories. I love that. That's so valuable, so important to me. And Rabbi Weinberg says, if someone offered you, he says to this workaholic, if somebody offered you money for your child, you wouldn't take the money. But yet, look at yourself. He says, take an honest look inside. See what's going on. You are trading time with your family that you would otherwise not really need. You would earn enough if you didn't have those billable hours that go into the wee hours of the night. If you value your family, spend time with them, says Rabbi Weinberg. And that is what King Solomon is saying here. Do not wear yourself out in pursuit of wealth. Don't spend the extra time that you don't need to. Because lest you desist from your own understanding, which means that even though intellectually you may say my family is important to me, but you're desisting from that understanding. Your behavior doesn't reflect what you believe intellectually to be true. Don't wear yourself out. Put in enough time to earn a good living, but beyond that, place value on what you actually value. Let's move on. In the next source, King Solomon is going to contrast the value of wealth to the value of wisdom. Pursuit of knowledge, pursuit of money. And he says, riches and honor are with me, on the one side. But then he says, timeless wealth and righteousness. It means to compare the two. So you have riches and honor, that means money. We are on page 3, source 6. But then he speaks of something called timeless wealth. What is this timeless wealth? We know that generally wealth has an expiration date. It's bound by the confines of time. A person may not be able to hold on to it forever. B, even if you could hold on to it for your whole life, it'll end there. You can't take it with you. So what does it mean, timeless wealth? Let me explain what that really means is wisdom. When you have wisdom and understanding, that is something which no one can ever take away from you. It goes with you to the next world. It's how do we understand? I'll go briefly into this. There's a concept, and this is a very important Jewish concept about the afterlife. We believe that the soul is eternal, and even when a person dies, it's the body that dies, and the death is just separation of body and soul. But the soul lives on in another existence, in another realm. I remember I was once in Costco, and I was just buying my tomatoes. I was trying to mind my own business. And it must have been that I looked Jewish or something. Because someone came over to me, an elderly gentleman, and he said to me, "Tell me, boychikel, do Jews believe in an afterlife?" And I said, yes, it's one of the fundamental Jewish beliefs. We believe in an afterlife, that the soul is eternal, indestructible. It will go on to another existence. And we spoke for a few minutes, and he said, I wish somebody would have told me that when I was younger. And someone once asked me, what motivated you to become a teacher of Jewish ideas and Torah values? And I said, that story played a pretty pivotal role. If someone could say, I wish somebody told me that younger, and that would have influenced their life differently, then I want to be that person to perhaps tell people that there is an afterlife, there's a soul, it's indestructible. And I remember as a kid, thinking about my soul. They would say that, if you do good things, so your soul will come before God one day, and God will reward you, and if you do things that aren't so good, there will be a reckoning for that. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I want to wish my soul the best of luck. Meaning, there was this divorce, like, that's not me, that's my soul. Buddy, have a good one. Hope it goes okay. But as I've studied more and perhaps matured, it's me. It's not like something else out there. My soul is me. And when one day my soul will depart from my body, it will go on to the next world. Whatever wisdom I have amassed, it's not that much, but it's a little, it will continue to have that. It's not going, the soul is the intellect. Whatever you gain in this world in terms of wisdom and understanding, that's timeless wealth. That goes with you. That can never be taken away from you. And that's the contrast that we have between riches and honor. It's transient, it's ephemeral. It's not going to last. Wisdom, on the other hand, that's part of your soul. That will remain with you. Anything you know will be taken with you into the next world. It's part of your soul. There's an important thing here, which is that sometimes you have people that are wealthy and they're very well respected, and people even sometimes go to them for advice. You know, a wealthy person, he's successful in life, let me ask for his advice. Different decisions you may have, you know, and by the way, even people that are very wise go for counsel. They ask this, you know, they ask people that are wiser than them. And I had a friend, he was from Great Britain, he was from England. We were study partners in Israel. Israel's a great melting pot of the Anglo cultures. You have people from South Africa, from Australia, and from England. I always said it's not fair. This friend, because of his accent, anything that he said, he just sounded smarter. You know, in England, when you say someone is smart, it means that they're well-dressed, right? That's, so he was intellectual, right, as opposed to smart. He was dressed pretty smart, too. And he told me a story of someone who was living in London, a Jewish person who was extremely wealthy in the Golders Green area of London. And people, he was very charitable, he gave a lot, he was a philanthropist, and people would line up at his door. He had hours. He couldn't have constantly people coming to his house to ask for assistance. So let's say between the hours of 7 and 8 o'clock in the evening, people would come and he would give them financial assistance. They would come for advice. And one day, his fortunes turned, as is prone to happen. And he lost his money. He lost all of his money. And the line stopped forming at the door. Nobody was coming anymore. And he turned to one of his friends, and by the way, you could sometimes tell who your friends are when things get a little bit rough. When you're sitting up there in the palace, everybody wants to be your friend, but when the fortunes turn, that will tell you who your true friends are. And he turns to his friend and I said, I get it. There's no more line of people coming to ask for financial assistance. I can't help anymore. But what about all those people that came for advice? Why have they stopped coming? And he realized, and it was a sad thing for him, and the only reason why they were asking for his advice was because they assumed that if he's wealthy, he must be wise. Now that he's not wealthy, they figure he lost his wisdom. But when you've gained true wisdom, when people respect you because you are truly a wise person, again, that is something which is irrelevant of your financial situation. That is something that will remain with you forever. Our next source on page 4. King Solomon in chapter 11 of Proverbs says that riches avail nothing on the day of wrath, but righteousness saves from death. I'll read that in Hebrew because this is one of the most famous verses in Proverbs. Lo yo'il hon b'yom evra. A fortune, a large collection of money will not help you on a day of anger. However, tzedakah, righteousness. We're familiar with the word tzedakah. It means charity, but it also means righteousness. Tatzil mimaves will save one from death. And when you think back to the not so far distant history, and you think back to the World War II era, when you think of wealthy Jews, my wife's grandmother came from a wealthy family that were in the cattle business before the war, and there were many Jewish businesses that thrived and flourished in pre-war Germany, Austria. There were many Jews who were very wealthy, but overnight they lost everything. When the Nazis came to power, they confiscated Jewish property. I'll recommend a film for you. Many of you maybe have seen it. It's called A Woman of Gold. And that's a story of a very wealthy family. I believe it was in Vienna, in Austria.
Yes.
And it's about a woman who you see the palatial home in which she grew up. It was spectacular, it was magnificent, and then the Nazis invade. And they just start carting off everything. They throw the family out, and they steal the artwork. And the film is about how she tries to retrieve through legal means the artwork that was stolen from her, and the anti-Semitism that still exists in Austria today, which it still does. But that just gives you a glimpse how you could have riches, but on the day of wrath, day when the Nazis came to power, it didn't help. It wasn't something which was able to help people. But righteousness is something that can save you from death. And to be a good, moral, a giving, a charitable person, that's a merit that you could never lose. No one could ever rob you of that once you've gotten it. Reminds me of a story. A Zaidi in the family. It's not from my side, from my wife's side. And he was a survivor of 11 different concentration camps, including Auschwitz. And I saw the interview. Steven Spielberg interviewed many survivors as a project to ensure that their testimony will live on beyond their lives. You know, another 30, 40, 50 years, I don't think the survivors will still be alive. And he wanted their story to remain recorded for posterity, that the story should endure. And Steven Spielberg interviewed my wife's grandfather. Henry Berger was his name. He's no longer alive. And he asked Henry, he said, tell me about Auschwitz. What was Auschwitz like? And he couldn't talk about it. It was too painful for him. The best he could say was, well, it wasn't a 4-star hotel. That was the best he could say, which doesn't describe Auschwitz. And when Henry Berger was in the camps, he was young. He was from Germany, and his family had tried to escape to France. And the day that their boat was supposed to depart from Vichy, France, sailing to the United States, they were ratted out and they were deported back to Germany. And he was in Auschwitz, and he worked in the kitchen, which was a coveted position because when you worked in the kitchen, you were privy to scraps of food. Now, what was considered excellent food were the potato peels, because the Germans wouldn't give that to the Jewish prisoners, they would give it to the pigs. And he would stuff his pockets with potato peels, and he would bring it back to his bunkmates who shared the same barracks as himself, and he would give these starving people some potato peels. And one day he was caught with his pockets full of potato peels on the way out of the kitchen, which was against the rules. And they beat him. And they beat him mercilessly to the point where he was almost no longer alive. And the miracle here was that they gave him a chance, and most people that were no longer able to work were killed. They gave him somehow he got the chance to recover. And he recovered. And he was put back on kitchen detail. And his first day back on the job, as he was leaving the kitchen, he collected the potato peels that were extra and he put them in his pockets. And he continued out of the room. It didn't deter him, the fact that he was beaten for it. There are people that are starving, and he was going to save them. He was going to perform the tzedakah, the righteousness, that may have been the reason why he was saved, I don't know. But the idea is that riches avail nothing on the day of wrath, but to be a righteous, moral person, that is something which no one can ever take away from you. And that is something which is seen as saving one from death. The next source is my favorite piece in this entire class. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited about this next one. It's on page 4, source 9. And this is an incredible statement. Says King Solomon, better dry bread, a stale crust of bread, and you're eating that with a little bit of lukewarm water, and peacefulness with it. You're eating it in a home with a woman that you love, and you're sharing your modest dinner together. It's not elaborate, nothing posh or fancy, but there's peace, there's serenity, tranquility in the house. And that is better, says King Solomon, than a house full of meals eaten in strife. The king and the queen, the rich man and woman living in that mansion, and they're sitting down with a butler, with wine, the finest wine and the best cuts of meat, or if you're vegan, best tofu out there. Now, I don't believe we have any vegans in this. Oh, we do. Sam, that one was for you. That was the tofu. So, and they're sitting. And there's no real conversation between them because they don't really have a relationship. And there's this very, very thick silence in the air because they're not on great speaking terms, because they spend most of their days bickering, arguing. There's strife and discord, a lack of harmony in that house. That's not great. And King Solomon says you're better off with the dry bread, with peace and serenity. And here Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch says you can never really know what's going on in someone else's life. The neighbor living down the block, their cars are always washed from that residual salt that now is on our roads. They don't have that, like, you know the white stuff that makes this film on your car when you're wearing your coat and you brush against it, gets your clothing all white, right? That's why I skipped the coat. This way you can't brush up against it. So if you would yell at me, my mother would be thankful. She'll say, thank you very much. If on the way you say, please, you should wear your coat. Don't you know it's cold out? My mother would be much appreciative. Their cars in their driveway, this rich neighbor, sparkling. The lawn is immaculate. The home is beautiful. And the people living inside look like movie stars. And you're like, wow, they must have the most awesome life in the world. But when that front door closes, do you know what's going inside their home? No, I don't know. It may be great, but you can't know that. And I want to read, the writing here is like poetry. Rabbi Hirsch was a German writer and he wrote so beautifully. I'm going to read this, if it's okay with you, verbatim. It's a bullet point in the middle of the page on page 4. And he says, far too often we judge human happiness according to outward appearances. And far too often we accustom ourselves and our children to overestimate the value of material acquisitions. Human happiness is by no means determined by this kind of wealth. In fact, as such acquisitions become everyday needs, they lose their value. And I'm going to pause for a moment here. When we create a level for ourselves that we need so much in order to be happy, how attainable will our happiness be? You know, I always marvel at the people that could travel with a little carry-on bag and have everything they need in that bag. You know, it's like,
this weekend, it's not easy.
What's that?
I did that this weekend. It's
Yeah,
not easy.
I knew a guy, he like traveled with his like toothbrush and a pair of, undergarments and that, I'm like, wow, like, I need my moisturizers. I just like, my toiletry bag is, but when you accustom yourselves to a minimalistic lifestyle, you could travel on Spirit Air without paying the extra $50 for a suitcase. Amazing, right? So if you set the bar of things that you need in order to guarantee your happiness, are you going to be a happy person? Maybe not. I have a younger brother who is a wise young man, and I love calling him a young man because it makes me sound older. He's 31 years old, so I got 5 years on him. And he makes the following statement. He says, the world says that necessity is the mother of invention. As we realize we need something, then the great thinkers like the Thomas Edisons out there go into their basements and they tinker and they toy, they explode a few things, and then finally we got a light bulb. So it's necessity, says the world, that's the mother of invention. He believes, says my brother, Avi Fink, that it is invention that's the mother of necessity. Think about that, right? Once we've invented certain things, we need them. Could anyone survive now without air conditioning? Absolutely not. It's like a given now. Like you have a home, it has central air, of course.
Depends where you live.
Again, that's true. That's true. It depends where you live. But Michigan. Let's talk about Michigan. 100 years ago, no one had air conditioning. Now the summers here could be brutal. It could be 100 degrees and humid and pretty rough. They survived. My father tells me, my father grew up in a modest home, and he grew up where in the summer they would open the windows in Brooklyn, New York, and they would have a spotter. And the spotter's job would be to wait by the window and wait for when that breeze would come. And when the breeze came, they would yell, breeze! And all the siblings would come and try to get that wafting of air, We live in a world now that we need air conditioning, If someone said, I have a car for sale, there's no heating or air conditioning. It's not sellable. It's a necessity. And as we've invented things, we've invented necessities. And they weren't less happy back then when they would, learn how to drink cool lemonade in order to stay cool in the winter, in the summer. Let's keep reading this. There's another great line coming up. It says, on the other hand, if they must one day be relinquished, our senses, which have become used to those superficialities, feel sorely deprived. When we no longer have them, we are miserable. Then he says, no man should be rated according to the quantity of his material acquisitions or his status in society. We can rate him as happy or unhappy only by looking into his heart and his domestic life. Now, could we look into someone's heart and know if they're happy? Could we know what's going on in their domestic life? Maybe if you're their marriage counselor, you can know a little bit about it, but otherwise, not really. That means that only God truly knows who's happy and who's not. I had a teacher who used to say the following. He heard a phrase that became part of our vernacular. We'll describe a person, often a wealthy person, and we'll say, that person is worth $10 million. That person is worth 5. And he said, step back for a moment and just think about the words that you're saying. That person is worth $5 million. We're going to, right, no man should be rated according to the quantity of his material acquisitions. We can't say he's worth $5 million. That's not the value of a person, how much money they have. That's not how we can rate even whether they're happy or not. We can't know that. Because, says King Solomon, you're better off with a piece of dry bread with peace than you are living in a palace where there is discord, and strife, and fighting. I'm going to end with one final idea from King Solomon, and that is the value of hard work, of putting savings away little by little every day, working hard, making a living. And that's source 10. He says, wealth from vanity will dwindle, which is interpreted by some that if you are a vain, wealthy person who needs to go and buy the most expensive styles or new model cars or technologies as they come out, your wealth will dwindle. But he who gathers by hand will accumulate. If slow and steady, every day you put away a little bit of savings, that is the true secret to accomplish really anything great in life. You know, you look at the vast wellsprings of Torah knowledge and you say, wow, daunting. I am just overwhelmed by it. Well, the way you start anything is by taking your first step. You do a little bit more tomorrow, a little bit more the next day. And when you work hard for it and you save up, you will appreciate it, you will value it. If you look at people that have won the lottery, I'm sure you all know this, people that win the lottery and then you fast forward 20 years. So they had these dreams, they're going to win the lottery and what they're going to do with it, and they're going to be happy once they win the lottery because that's the only thing that's really missing in their lives. 20 years later, usually they are in a worse state than they were before they won the lottery. And part of that is because it just comes as this flash flood of money. They didn't work for it, they didn't develop it, and when you work hard for something, it's yours. You know, I remember this past summer. It's hard to remember the summer in weather like this. We planted a garden with my children. We went out back and we planted everything you could imagine. You know, we planted eggplants, tomatoes, zucchini, jalapeno peppers, basil. I can keep going, but everything. And we also planted beets. They were a special kind of beet called heirloom beets, where instead of it being solid red, it was this spiral white and red. You can't buy it in stores, at least not the stores that I usually frequent. And these, could you buy heirloom beets in stores? Is that Whole Foods?
Yeah, I know.
Excellent. I'm gonna go to Whole Foods to see if I can find some. So we had these beets, and then there was time to harvest them. And then when you harvest beets, for some reason, certain ones are very large and robust, and other ones are a little scrawnier and underdeveloped. But I couldn't throw any beets out. You know why? Because we spent hours working in the sun, getting the soil ready, making little furrows, little lines in the soil, putting the seeds in and spacing them properly, and then we watered it diligently every single day, once in the morning, and those hot days in the summer, once again at night. And then when it was finally time to pick those beets, I was going to eat those beets because we worked for it. And when you work hard for something, and then you finally have the fruits of those labors, that's an incredible feeling of satisfaction. And that's what he's saying over here. If you gather by hand, it will accumulate, you will enjoy it. I want to wish you all a wonderful day and thank you for coming.
Thank you.